In this video, we are going to learn how to graphically add and subtract vector or how to obtain the resultant of a vector graphically. Example question 29. Vectors P and Q are drawn to scale. Determine the resultant of vector P minus Q. So here I have vector P and Q, and I need to determine what is the resultant of P minus Q. P minus Q can also be written as vector P plus negative of vector Q. Now here I have vector Q, not the negative of the vector. But negative of a vector is a vector which has the same magnitude but points in the opposite direction. So if this is my vector Q, I can draw negative Q as a vector having the same length but going opposite to Q. So this becomes my vector negative Q. And now I can graphically add vector P bar and negative Q bar to get their resultant. We are going to follow 3 steps to add them graphically. The first step is to draw the first vector. So you can choose your first vector to be either P or Q. It doesn't matter. Any vector you can choose as the first one. So right now I'm going to choose vector P bar as my first vector because we are determining resultant of P minus Q. So we draw vector P bar first. When you're drawing the vector P bar, you have to make sure that the magnitude of this vector and the direction in which it points remains the same. So length of P bar is not changing, as well as it is pointing in the same direction as my original vector here. Second step is to draw the second vector from the head of the first. So if I have a vector, let's say A bar, the head of the arrow is this part over here, which is the head of my vector. And the region where the vector originates from is called the tail. So when I'm drawing the second vector, I have to start drawing my second vector from the head of the first. So negative Q, I'm going to start drawing from the head of P. So we draw the vector negative Q. Again, when you're drawing negative Q, you have to make sure magnitude and direction does not change. Negative Q is pointing like this here. I draw it in the same manner when I start to draw it from the head of P. Then the third step, you draw the resultant from the tail of the first vector to the head of the second. So the first vector I drew was P. I will start drawing my resultant from the tail of P and go until the head of Q. So this is how you draw the resultant R bar. So this is my resultant R bar, which is P minus Q. When you're drawing this vector, you have to ensure that each of this vector is in the form of an arrow. Drawing just a line is not acceptable. You have to draw proper arrows for vector P, negative Q, as well as the resultant. And when you draw them, you have to make sure that the final figure is a closed figure. You cannot draw open-ended figure. Like I cannot draw P bar and then Q bar, which is not touching P and the resultant like this. This is not correct. It must be a closed figure. Vector negative Q must start from the head of P and the resultant must start from the tail of the first vector and go until the head of the second. The same step you can do by choosing negative Q as your first vector. That will also give you the same answer. So now we will try this question again by choosing negative Q as my first vector. So let us start by drawing negative Q first. This is negative Q. After you draw negative Q, I will draw P from the head of negative Q. So let's start to draw P from the head of Q. After you draw P bar, now I will draw the resultant from the tail of the first vector to the head of the second. So this is my resultant R. And if you notice, in both cases, the resultant has the same magnitude and it is pointing in the same direction. So whether you choose to draw P first or you choose to draw negative q first, as long as you follow the correct steps to draw these vector, your resultant will come out to be the same. Example question 30. Vector p and q are drawn to scale. Determine the resultant vector p plus q. So again, this is my vector p bar and this is q bar. We follow the same three steps as before. First, we draw the first vector. So I'm going to start with p. I will draw vector p bar as it is. Same magnitude, same direction. Then we start to draw the second vector from the head of the first. So I will draw my q bar from the head of p. So this is my vector q. Then the third step is to draw the resultant from the tail of the first vector to the head of the second. So this is my resultant r bar. And this r bar is equal to p bar plus q bar. So these are the three steps that you can follow to graphically add vectors.